Hi, everyone. I'm going to give it another minute or so. It's not quite 10 o'clock, but I appreciate you guys jumping on early. Um, it's snowing here in Overland Park, Kansas, like the nice fat snowflake. So I'm really enjoying the view outside my window. I think I'm more excited that I don't have to leave my house. Okay, I'm going to give it one more minute and then I will get going. As always, if you guys have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. It's a pretty small group, but it's probably easier if I just keep myself off mute and you guys all stay muted. I wanted to go over the bulletin I sent out on Monday. I've been getting questions on some version of electronic signatures, remote online notarization. Yesterday it was, can they DocuSign a deed? The day before was, well, we're going to Zoom them. I get the Facebook question a lot. So it was imperative with the legislation coming out that we get something out to you guys. There's just some key points that I wanted to go through to make sure we're all understanding, we're on board, and you understand Antic's position. So I'm going to share my screen, and instead of doing my normal candy dish where I would give you the PowerPoint and I'd have pictures of my dogs, I'm going to do a little more bare bones and just literally pull up the bulletin that I created. So you should be able to see this. And if you can't for some reason, throw it in the chat and I will work on it, but I'm pretty sure you can see it. What's nice is, I mean, I created this. So if there's flaws, it's my fault, I guess. But we wanted something out there for you. The statute was actually enacted in August, I think the 28th, and it says it in here. The problem with, or the reason why we didn't send out a bulletin earlier is because of obviously COVID. So COVID had those executive orders signed by the governor that went out early last year. They were effective until that executive order got extended and then extended again, went to the end of December. So executive order no longer in place. But also we are waiting on the Secretary of State to implement rules and regulations. So even though you have that statute out there, we needed the regulation. So Secretary of State has passed emergency regulations to be able to allow for remote online notarization. So I felt it was time to get that bulletin out there. Plus I'm just getting more and more questions as to, is this acceptable? So I wanted to throw in at the beginning just the key terms. I hear these acronyms thrown around a lot, and I just wanted to make sure you guys had a reference as to where they're coming from, what they mean. RON is what we're talking about today. RON is, I feel like what I'm always talking about, but it's remote online notary. So you literally, let's say I'm here, Chrissy is at her house, we're doing a notarization session like this. Neither one of us are in the same area. It actually wouldn't work because of statute, because I'm not in Missouri, I'm actually in Kansas, but we'll talk about that. So RON is different than some of these others. Some states allow for, there might be remote online and then you wet signature it. And so that's different than everything with RON is online. There's no paper trail unless we make the paper trail, which again, I'll talk about in a minute. So I went through, when I was writing this bulletin, I was like, how do I want to make it easy for use? I understand that agents sometimes don't always read everything we send out, but because it's such an important bulletin, I want to make sure we have all the information there. So just a couple of things. The notary has to be registered as a notary. They have to take an exam. I believe the exam's pretty straightforward. I think I've talked to a couple people that have taken it, but you do have to take an exam. So you can't just be a remote online notary without first taking that exam. You got to register with the Secretary of State. And when you're registering, you have to tell them what platform you're going to be using, what technology. So there's a bunch of different providers out there. There's some that I prefer over others. So Elizabeth Berg and I in our office have gone through and vetted some of these software providers. We've pretty much asked them all the questions we needed to ask from the lawyer standpoint to make sure that they're in line, that they make sense. And then it's kind of suggested things that we would need to see from a state perspective to make sure. So when you're applying to become the notary, you have to tell them what technology you're using. So if you're using Notary Cam or Notarize or whatever it may be, you have to tell them. You can, as a remote online notary, do an acknowledgement or jurat. I can't think of any other, what else you guys would be wanting to do. So I think that's pretty given and common and not really a big shocker. You can perform in a remote online notary if the principal, and so this is important as well. So the principal needs to be in the presence of the notary. We need to be using this audio visual video technology we're using now. It either needs to be personally known to me. So if I knew Chrissy and I'm okay with her, I don't need to have her ID, or we need to go through the third party two-factor authentication. So what that means is in all of these software providers, and once you sign up with somebody, you'll go through a demo with them and you'll be able to understand it a little bit better. But what happens is, let's say I'm the signer and I go on there, I put in my information, I might get a text or something to verify that, yes, it's me, I'm filling it out. Well, then I have to answer 5 questions. And you know, when you do like your credit report and it's like, where did you live 12 years ago? And you're like, what street? And you're trying to remember your dog's last name. I mean, I guess you would know your dog's last name, but like your first dog, you know, or whatever it may be. They're going to ask you 5 of those questions and you have to pass. And if you don't pass, you usually have one under statute, you have one other, or maybe it's under MISMO regulations. You have one, you can fail it twice. If you fail it twice, you can't take it again for another 24-hour period because they want to ensure that whoever we're insuring is in fact them. So what I've run into in the last week alone is people saying, well, I don't have an ID. So this is my Bed Bath & Beyond credit card, but, or not credit card, gift card, but it's like, oh, I showed them my ID on Facebook. They could see that I have blue eyes. So that's sufficient, or not Facebook, Zoom or FaceTime or whatever it is. That is not sufficient. It's not going through what the regulations require. We need to be going through that third-party authentication because what's happening is the software provider takes that information. So depending on which one you're using, they might take a pic, they might have your ID, you take your cell phone and you take a picture front and back. What they then do is run it through a third party and verify that that's a valid ID and that you are who you say you are, plus you're doing those questions. So the notary, so if you're the notary on the back end, you're going to see that, yes, I passed my 5 tests, and you're going to see that my that ID is valid. How would you be able to tell me going like this whether it's a valid ID or not? I mean, that's just not probable. And I think courts would have a field day if we allowed that. So even under the executive order, you couldn't do that. And a lot of people, mainly attorneys, were trying to do some kind of Zoom or FaceTime, not acceptable. No way to be able to keep track of that. What's great is with these remote online notary situations, everything's recorded. So I can't come back later and say, well, that isn't me. Well, you have a video of me on camera saying, yes, this is who I say I am. Plus I took a picture of my ID. I answered all the questions that nobody else should know about me. It's a little bit harder for you to say it wasn't me in the terms of Shaggy. So besides that, the principal needs to understand the nature of the transaction. It has to be their free will. So just like you would be if they were coming to your closing office, we need to make sure that they understand that they, you know, if they have dementia or something like that, are we noting that? Are we making, can we tell that they don't understand what time of day it is? Do they know who the president is? Do they know, what month it is? Stuff like just your normal stuff. But you can tell pretty quickly if somebody isn't competent, and you can also tell pretty quickly if they seem to be under duress or somebody's pushing them. I mean, clearly you wouldn't be able to tell if somebody had a gun to me outside of the frame, but maybe I'd be acting a little differently or saying stuff like that. We need to be making sure that the principal and the notary speak the same language or language that they understand. So if I had somebody speaking to me in Italian, I would not know what they were saying. So you have to have both parties speaking the same language. And they need to be able to establish their own electronic signature. So what's cool about all this software is the client goes in, they sign all this stuff, they sign up. As long as they have a webcam, the ability to download some software, it's pretty simple on their end to be able to electronically sign, or they'll be able to type it in and say, I adopt that as my electronic signature. The big thing with Missouri law is that the remote online notary, so you guys, have to be in the state of Missouri, has to be in Missouri. So if it's recorded anywhere else or they're notarized from anywhere else, so we're seeing a lot of Virginia ones, not approved by Missouri law, can't rely upon it. The executive order went a step further, and it required both the principal and the notary to be located in Missouri. So I had one where the guy was in Canada, notary was in Missouri. It didn't matter because under the executive order, we couldn't rely upon it because they both had to be in Missouri. So in the new statute or the statutes, the way we're going forward, the notary has to be here. And I was on the Ron legislation team to push this through. And we really wanted to make it so that we don't have some big notary company out of Virginia or other states taking over all of your business. So we wanted it so that they have to actually be here in Missouri. They should know Missouri law, making sure that the notarization is correct. So has to be Missouri. That's why that part is bolded. You can charge a fee. You just need to make sure you're disclosing that up front. And the software companies, from everything I'm seeing, they're going to be charging about $25 to $40 per transaction to use their software. So there would be a way to be able to charge that back to the client. But you need to be disclosing that up front. And I would say it needs to be in writing. You also need to tell them that the fee is not regulated by statute, nor is it required by statute. So you can't tell them that they have to pay it. It's not required. I mean, they do have to pay it if you're going to charge it, but you do have to tell them that the statute doesn't require it. It's a fee that you're requiring to offset costs. Then we have the proper certificates, because it's like, okay, how do you acknowledge when you're remote online notary, or would you know if you saw this in the land records that it was done via remote versus in person to person? So you're going to have your identification. Here's one for the individual. And then here's one for the representative capacity. So that would be LLC, trust, anything like that, your normal. I went ahead and gave these to you guys also in a Word document, so you can cut and paste these, edit them the way you want them. But I wanted them in the bulletin because they come straight from the statute. This cut and paste job is straight from the statute. So let's not be playing around with the language too much, because statute provides it. It's a little bit easier to rely upon it. In notarizing an electronic document, the notary shall attach to the remote online notary certificate a signature and a seal. So if you're the notary, you're going to sign it and you're going to adopt your signature, however it may be. And then there's also a seal. So you have to get the seal. They range in price from, I've seen $25 to $100 for your seal, but it's just like you would have when you're a notary at home sealing it. We need to be able to emboss it, if you will, but it's all, remember, online. So there's going to be a seal that you'll attach. The great thing about a remote online notary is once the transaction's done, your software, I want to say seals, it protects that document so it can't be edited anymore. So once it's done, and it's tamper evident or tamper resistant, so that if somebody came in and tried to fix it, you would be able to see that. And we'd be able to know that it's not valid. So it's really neat how the software has it all figured out, that once it's done, it's done. So there's not going to be that argument of, well, they didn't sign it on that date or something like that. So it'll be a little bit harder if you have to re-execute because you find an issue. You probably would have to re-execute and re-acknowledge because you're not going to be able to go in and change something. With regard to journals, so this is a little bit different than what you guys currently have. You have to keep an electronic journal, but you also still have to keep your paper journal as well. So the electronic journal of the RON event has to be kept from no less than 10 years from the date of last entry. So if my last entry was January 1, 2020, I would have to keep it until January 1, 2030. And if I'm horrible at math, I think I can add 10. So if that's not right, don't hold me to it. But 10 years from the last date of your last entry. Additionally, you have to keep a permanent bound journal. So not only are you're doing double duty at this point. Your electronic journal is going to have a lot of that same information. It's going to be date and time, type of remote online notarial act. So are you doing, what are you doing? You're acknowledging something. What's the description of the document? The electronic signature printed in the address of each principal. So you're going to have what their signature looked like, their name, their address, the printed name and address of each requester of fact, the evidence of identity used for each principal. So if you relied on driver's license, passports, whatever it may be, if there was a fee charge, the address of where the remote act was performed. So if it's not your regular course of business, so if you're in your normal title office and you're doing those, that's completely fine. It's just if you're doing it from home because you're working from home, you need to put it, because the big thing is that it happened or occurred in Missouri. So because I live in Kansas, I wouldn't be able to do any remote online notarization for Missouri. And then the name of the software. So it's pretty extensive list, but this comes straight out of the statute. So I'd be figuring out a way to be able to get all that information and have it in a way that it's available and that you're also keeping that information in your permanently bound journal. As always, you're not going to want to include or record any social security numbers or credit card numbers. So don't be putting that stuff in your journal. The remote online notary may also keep track of any circumstances for not performing. So let's say they didn't complete the third-party authentication correctly, or you realize that, they just don't seem lucid. I don't feel comfortable doing this. I don't speak Italian, whatever it may be. Even if it's a failed attempt, you still need to be keeping track of that. The journal entry may not be deleted or altered after the record is entered. And a backup system must be in place to provide a duplicate copy of this remote online notary system. So as you can see, there's all sorts of rules and nuances and things that need to be done in order to become a remote online notary, to keep up with it. I personally think a fee is very much a given. I don't think every agent will be doing this. So for the agents that do, they'll be getting referrals from people who don't. And it takes some time and some knowledge and some expertise. So I do think there's some money that if it were me, I'd be charging, but I also understand if, if nobody else in the market's doing it, whatever it may be. And obviously I can't tell you to charge or not charge, but personally, I would charge. Journal and notarial records should be delivered to the Missouri Secretary of State upon resignation, revocation, or expiration or death. So also you should be giving those things. I don't know how much that actually happens, but just know that it is in the statute. Not so much about Ron because that's new, but even your old permanently bound journals, I'm not sure how many of them are getting sent to the Secretary of State, but just know that that is the law. Just like the journal itself, the audio and video recording has to be kept for at least 10 years. And you're going to want to know about your lender. So if your lender is allowing for remote online notary, some of them want the recording to be kept for the life of the loan. So if it's a 30-year loan, they might have additional requirements, but just know that statute requires at least 10 years of recording. Most of the software providers that I have spoken to are allowing or providing for a cloud storage within their software system. So you're not going to be going and having to go add additional storage yourself. Some of them might do it for an additional fee, but it's kind of nice that all of your transactions are right there in the software system. Besides the notary statute, so they added on all of these remote online notary statutes, but they also went back and added or changes some of the just plain notary or electronic notary portions of the statutes. Most of them I'm not talking about today. I wanted to stick with remote online notary, but the biggest thing is papering out. And I call it papering out because I didn't really have a better term for it, but it's going to be used in those counties where electronic recording is just not available. So if you, I'm just going to make up a county. I know Jackson County records, but let's say they don't. And you did this whole remote online notary thing. I have my computer, everybody signed, everything's good. We followed all the statute. What do we do now? Well, you're going to print out that deed and you're going to attach a certificate to it. So me as the notary, I need to be the one printing it out. And I'm going to attach this paper copy of the electronic document bearing the signature. And I'm going to say, this is a true and correct copy of the document that was originally in electronic form bearing an electronic signature. So this is huge that the statute included this, because had not, we could only have recorded in electronic recording counties, which luckily, the majority of the counties are doing that. I just know not all agents are electronically recording. So this allows for provisions for those that are not. Your notary in recording or printing out this paper copy needs to confirm that the electronic document contains an electronic signature. We want to make sure that you personally printed it or supervise the printing of it. So I guess I could I work by myself, so my dogs can't print, but maybe I could tell my husband to do it and I could supervise the watching of him, whatever it may be. So of course, if you're in an agent's office where you have assistants or people who might be doing that, you just need to be making sure you're supervising the printing of it if you're going to be the one signing that it's a true and correct copy. You can't make any changes or modifications to the document. So you can't print it out and say, well, I actually meant to put 21, not 2020, whatever it may be. You can't have any alterations. The notary public has to be commissioned. So I can't do it. I'm a Kansas notary, so I wouldn't be able to print it out because I'm not commissioned under Missouri law. Your certificate has to have the following: signed and date by the notary. It has to identify the jurisdiction which the certification is performed. So if I'm in Jackson County, Missouri, contain the title of the notary, my name and who I am, blah, blah, blah. Indicate the date of expiration, include an official seal or stamp. So there you would be using your physical stamp to do this copy. And then the form of the certificate can be used something like this. And again, I've included that Word document so you can cut and paste it. So I certify, blah, blah, blah. These are true and correct. So it has all your information there. Again, it's right out of the statute. So if you're going to be doing this, use that language. It just makes sense. I foresee this happening a lot where the notary gets done by maybe somebody else outside your office, but then you need to be able to print it. So you shouldn't get any pushback from clerks in recording these, because if you think about it, that original copy that you're signing is going to be what ink, it's going to be embossed, and you're just attaching, just like you would an affidavit where people try to put copies of powers of attorney or stuff like that. Not that that's acceptable, but people try it. Or any other kind of document where you're adding something like that. So this allows for it. It's in the statute. So if you have any issues with that, let us know, because we can get MLTA involved in just making sure that counties are properly recording these. So the question then becomes, where is all this information, or how do I become a notary? Where do I take the test? All that information can be found on the Missouri Secretary of State's dedicated electronic notary website. So I have the website there for you. The applications there as well. What's cool is it also gives us a list of all the software providers. So any of the software providers I've talked to, I'm telling them you need to go get approved by Missouri, or I can't use you, or I can't push you through. And then it has a list of approved electronic notaries. So let's say your office is small and you just don't plan on getting the technology or dealing with this. I would say go on there. You'll be able to find people who are approved to do it, and you might be able to work with them to be able to get them to notarize your documents in situations where you don't have any other options. So with all of that, that's the statute, that's what's going on. It looks like I don't have any questions yet, so I'm going to keep going. For underwriting, so what do we got to do to actually insure these? Because I just gave you this laundry list of things to do, but everybody likes a little check sheet of what do I need to do. So first, we need to make sure everybody consents to the transaction, including the lender. So I've attached in our bulletin a sample approval. It's a consent that everybody should sign. If you guys want to put your letterhead on that, anything like that, it's just a Word document. I left it editable for you because everybody's different. Obviously, if you want to change the terminology, I think we made that up here at Antic. So the biggest thing is that everybody's signing off on it. If you're working with a lender and you have closing instructions, you want to make sure that they authorize the use of RON. If not, you're going to have them update that to allow for it. You need to make sure you're using one of the RON approved software vendors. If you have Qualia, what's really cool is Qualia has their own RON ability. So everything's within that system, which is awesome in my opinion. They had a great system, but if you're not Qualia, there's plenty of other vendors. And if you want to talk to me, I can tell you which ones. I just don't want to do like a rolling ad of, hey, go with these guys. But individually, I would love to do them. You need to make sure that the notary is actually an approved electronic notary in Missouri. The notary must be located in the state of Missouri at the time of the acknowledgement. And one way to be able to see that, so if you're getting one of these deeds and you're wondering, well, were they in Missouri or not? You're going to know by the county and state in the seal at the top. The subscribed and sworn part where it says County of Jackson, State of Missouri, or whatever it is. So when we see that and we see County of whatever, State of Virginia, I know, okay, the notary was not located in Missouri. We cannot rely on this. Signer location, the person whose signature is going to be notary must be within the United States. If the person's outside of the US, contact me. Right now with Canada, nobody can get to the US embassy, or they might be able to now, but they weren't for a while. For Canada, I have been allowing Ron to go through. They're not part of the Hague Convention, so it's even worse because we can't just have them go to a notary and get an apostille. It's a little bit more complicated than that. So if you have somebody outside of the US, let's talk about it, but I want to make that an informed decision before I just say, oh yes, all these, countries are on the list. The biggest thing then is that you're able to understand and speak to them. So if they're in Italy and you can't speak Italian, definitely can't be doing it. The person who's signing has to be a US citizen or permanent resident. And this is because of the two-factor authentication. Their software is just it's not worldwide, it's nationwide. So they're able to verify passports and US passports and driver's license, but it doesn't go beyond that. So they wouldn't be able to verify a Mexican passport or an Italian passport or whatever it may be. So at this time, until that software progression happens, it has to be a US citizen or permanent resident. So they have to have a US ID. And if you think about it, most of these software providers knew that Ron was coming, but they probably thought, we got 3 to 5 years to kind of build this up. And then with COVID, that fast forwarded everything. So many people kind of dropped other projects to kind of make this the focal point and to ramp it up so that we can get this out to the masses and have the ability for people to use it. So, a lot of the platforms are built, but then, like stuff like this, where maybe they don't have that ability yet, I think it will get there. It was more important to make sure that US IDs were verified first. If there's going to be a fee, it needs to be agreed upon between the notary and the person signing in advance of the act. It also needs to be explained that the fee is separate from other notary fees provided in Missouri statutes. It's not mandated by law. So we talked about that before, but put it down here because it's important if you're charging that fee that you're letting them know and that it's not mandated by law. county acceptance of RON. Anywhere that you get electronic recording, you're going to be able to record these without issue. But then if you don't, just follow the papering out process that we talked about above. And then as always, if it's over your over limit authority, you need to come to us. So if it's over, let's say your over limit authority is $1 million, and you're coming to me for over limit authority anyway, and you plan on doing a RON closing, it'd be nice if you could just put that in the note section. Let us know that you plan on doing that. I don't foresee any issues with that. We just want to make sure we're aware of it. Also, not most lenders are not ready or capable of electronic notes yet. So this is really, we're talking about the notarizations of deeds of trust and deeds, the recorded documents that we're looking at. So that is the bulletin in a nutshell. Let me see my other documents that I put in the words. I think you're fine. I don't know if they really need any other discussion, or let me look. Let's see, I'm going to share my little folder with you. I sent you the forms, the approval, and this was just, we wrote this letter as kind of a, I know you can't see it, just a sec. Okay, so we wrote this letter as a just a description of what RON is, because imagine you being on the other side, you've never heard anything about this, and you're like, you're gonna do what? So it's just a nice little description of what it's going on, what we're doing, what they'll need to be able to have in order to be able to do it. So I definitely edit to your, enjoyment, but I wanted it out there just so you guys had something as kind of a description. I'm going to go ahead, and we've recorded this. We'll have this up on our, where all of our online videos are going once that's available to everyone. But if you had anybody in your office who wasn't able to attend, or you guys have questions about this later on, you can always contact me individually, and I'd love to talk about it. Or we can send you the recording so that you have it. But it doesn't look like there's any other questions. So I appreciate all of your time for taking the time. This is important, but let's see. We have another candy dish on February 16th. I'm going to talk with David Litton about the annual agent review and going through some of the stuff that we're seeing on a routine beat basis, and just some notes of things to watch out for this year so that next year reviews go even smoother. So until then, have a great day, guys. I'm going to continue watching the snow out my window, but happy Thursday. Bye.
Bye, thanks.